"You're not our kind of customer," Victoria Burns said, her smile sweet yet laced with venom as she gently pushed the withdrawal slip back toward the woman across from her. The grand lobby of Meridian Financial, with its gleaming marble floors, towering glass walls, and dazzling chandeliers, seemed to freeze for a moment. Curious glances flickered, movements stalled, as if the entire room was holding its breath in unison. Selina Hart, dressed in a simple hoodie, plain white sneakers, her face composed and calm, glanced down at the piece of paper that had been pushed back toward her. $115,000. Her money. An account under her name. But in Victoria's eyes, Selina was just an anonymous black woman, an undeserving intruder who had stepped into a domain they believed belonged exclusively to the powerful and the white. An employee behind the counter muttered, just loud enough for Selina to hear, "Probably a settlement check." A ripple of giggles spread, quickly stifled into smug glances. A young security guard began to drift closer, his hand brushing the radio strapped to his belt, ready to intervene if necessary. The other customers, some curious, some visibly annoyed, remained silent. Victoria leaned in slightly toward Selina, lowering her voice like someone savoring the perfect opportunity to humiliate another. "There's a check. Cashing place just a block down," she said, the heavy scent of Chanel perfume hanging thick in the air between them. "They'll know how to handle customers like you." Selina did not blink. She simply reached into her worn leather handbag, a gift from her loyal team when she was promoted to COO, and pulled out her phone. Her movements were slow, composed, entirely devoid of anger. While Victoria and the staff behind the counter continued to exchange triumphant glances, Selina calmly dialed a familiar number. Across the city, on the top floor of Meridian Financial's headquarters, the executive elevators suddenly stirred. The boardroom fell silent. Security monitors flickered to life, broadcasting a live feed from the flagship branch. A storm was brewing, and within the next 7 minutes, everyone still smirking would learn the woman they had just humiliated wasn't just a customer. She was the CEO of the entire bank. And today, Selina Hart would not be forgiving. Selina Hart stepped through the heavy glass doors of the Meridian Financial branch, known as the crown jewel of the nationwide banking network. Outside, the early summer sun blazed against the engraved brass plaques and the spotless windows that reflected the opulence the place sought to project. But inside, among the rows of high-end leather chairs and marble-topped counters, another invisible presence lingered. Discrimination, artfully disguised beneath polite smiles, subtle glances, and light-as-air nods of dismissal. Selina, dressed plainly in a navy blue hoodie and simple white sneakers, headed straight to the waiting area. She drew no outward attention, at least not initially. But some of the teller's eyes flicked toward her in reflexive, conditioned sweeps, scanning, assessing, categorizing. A black woman, modestly dressed, no recognizable luxury brands, no polished appearance. To them, she simply did not belong here. Selina sat down in one of the waiting chairs, pretending to scroll through her messages. But her eyes missed nothing. The way a white businessman in an expensive suit was warmly greeted the moment he walked through the door without needing to pull a ticket, and was ushered straight into a private transaction room. The way an elderly Asian couple was pointed coldly toward the number machine without even a hint of a smile. The way a young blonde woman in jeans and a t-shirt was welcomed with cheerful small talk about weekend plans, and the way a Latino man, dressed in a laborer's uniform, had to present an array of documents just to withdraw a modest paycheck. Selina quietly noted every detail, every nuance of the discrimination's soft in form, but sharp as a razor blade. When 3 white customers who arrived after her were served first without hesitation, she merely nodded slightly to herself. Everything was unfolding exactly as she had anticipated. But she needed to experience it firsthand, not just read about it in reports. 37 minutes. That was how long Selina sat waiting before stepping up to the counter, withdrawal slip and paperwork neatly prepared in hand. As she approached Chloe Adams, a young teller with her hair neatly tied back, her initial smile still clinging to professionalism, the real test began. "Good afternoon. I'd like to make a withdrawal," Selina said calmly, handing over her documents through the glass partition. Chloe accepted them, but her smile quickly faded as her eyes scanned the amount on the withdrawal slip. $115,000. She glanced back up at Selina, clearly struggling internally. That brief moment set the tone for everything that followed. This wasn't just another transaction, it was an unspoken test. "One moment, please," Chloe said, her voice faltering slightly. She turned and whispered something to Evan Price, a senior teller at the next station, his face contorting with visible distaste, as if he had just caught a whiff of something foul. Evan raised an eyebrow, looked Selina up and down, and then gave a small nod, a tiny gesture, yet it served as an unmistakable signal. Immediately, the atmosphere around Selina began to shift, piercing stares, whispered conversations, frosty body language, as if her very request to withdraw her own money had somehow turned her into a potential threat. Chloe returned with a strained, forced smile. "Since this is a large amount," she explained, lowering her voice as though revealing something dangerous, "we'll need to verify some information. Thank you for your understanding." Selina simply nodded, her face unreadable. She had prepared for this moment long before, because she had lived through moments like this her entire life. Meanwhile, Evan Price quietly summoned Noah Cross, a tall employee with a smug demeanor and a barely concealed sneer in his eyes. Both men positioned themselves behind Chloe, looming over the small transaction space like dark shadows. "Noah, check the account history on this one," Evan said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "Look out for suspicious activity." Selina stood still, her face as motionless as carved stone. But inside, she could feel every heartbeat pounding against her ribs, every old memory rising, the time she had been doubted, underestimated, humiliated, simply because of the color of her skin. Before long, Victoria Burns made her entrance, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor like a victory march. Her smile might have fooled the average customer, but to Selina, someone who had spent a lifetime reading such performances, it was nothing but a thin, brittle mask. "Apologies for the inconvenience," Victoria said, her voice dripping with honey, but her eyes as cold and sharp as blades. "Given the amount, we must exercise caution. Could you tell us what this money will be used for?" The question, so unnecessary compared to the smooth, unquestioning service the previous white customers had received, hung in the air, heavy and insulting. Selina tightened her grip slightly on her phone. It was time. Selina Hart gently placed her phone on the counter, right in front of Victoria Burns' line of sight. Under the shimmering light reflecting from the glass dome above, the screen clearly displayed a contact, unnamed, showing only two brief words, "Private line." Victoria frowned. Noah Cross and Evan Price exchanged a quick, wary glance. Chloe Adams stood silently in the background, her eyes filled with hesitation, as if she were witnessing a silent storm forming right before her eyes but had no idea how to stop it. Selina didn't rush. She slowly dialed a number, every movement radiating a terrifying calm that made everyone around her even more uneasy. "Hello, Morgan," Selina said, her voice low but clear, cutting through the uncomfortable silence that blanketed the grand lobby. On the other end of the line, Morgan Blake, Chief Operating Officer of the entire Meridian Financial system, nearly shot up from her seat when she recognized the familiar voice. No further questions, no need for confirmation. Morgan instantly understood the gravity of the situation. Selina Hart never called her directly unless things had crossed the line of tolerance. "Location?" Morgan asked crisply, as her fingers flew across the computer keyboard to access the internal surveillance system. "Flagship branch downtown," Selina replied, her gaze locked firmly on Victoria, who was now visibly realizing that something was slipping irreversibly out of her control. "Duration?" Morgan pressed, her voice urgent but tightly controlled. 37 minutes, Selina responded. "And counting." At the Meridian Financial headquarters, in the top-floor boardroom, 3 board members, Thomas Whitmore, Isabel Grant, and Peter Langston, were in the middle of discussing the new quarterly plan, when a young technician burst into the room, his face pale, hands trembling as he held a report. "Sirs, ma'am, sorry for the interruption, but Something serious is happening at the downtown branch, he stammered. Thomas Whitmore frowned, setting his coffee cup down. What is it? He asked. The answer wasn't spoken. It flashed directly onto the large screen in the center of the room, a live feed showing Selina Hart, their CEO, being publicly humiliated by her own bank employees, in front of customers, under the scrutiny of security cameras. All three board members shot to their feet almost simultaneously. No further discussion, no private meetings necessary. Every decision had already been made by Selina Hart's actions alone. Their task now was simply to execute. Meanwhile, Morgan Blake had already completed issuing the emergency summons. She signaled the security team to download all surveillance footage from the morning, perform facial recognition analysis, and collect evidence. The technical staff moved with the urgency of handling a national-level cyber attack. We're on our way, Morgan said firmly into the phone. Selina allowed herself a small smile, not one of satisfaction, but the smile of a warrior who knew that her first strike had landed squarely on the enemy's weakest point. She lifted her head and locked eyes with Victoria, who was still desperately clinging to the last shreds of her crumbling confidence. Well, Selina said, her voice low yet carrying across the entire lobby. I'll wait. A heavy silence engulfed the space, thickening the air as if the entire room was bracing itself for the unstoppable storm that was about to break. The sharp clack of high heels striking marble echoed through the lobby as Victoria Burns approached, her posture still clinging to the familiar authority she had wielded over her 15 years as branch manager. She forced a tight smile, the strained grin of someone desperately clutching at the last remnants of fragile power. Ma'am, Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. If you're unhappy with our service, I'm sorry. But according to bank policy, we reserve the right to refuse a transaction if we suspect the legitimacy of the funds. Evan Price stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with defiance. Noah Cross leaned casually against the counter, idly spinning a pen between his fingers, seemingly bored by the unfolding situation, utterly oblivious to the storm about to break. Selina Hart slowly placed her phone back on the counter, her gaze sweeping across every face. Victoria, Evan, Noah. One by one, each condescending glance, each smug smirk was seared into her memory like tiny knife wounds. I understand, Selina said, her voice eerily calm. Then we shall wait, for the person with the true authority to make that final decision. Victoria smirked, her lips curling with thinly veiled disdain. There's no one above me at this branch, she said firmly. I'm the manager here, and if you refuse to leave, I will have no choice but to call security. As if triggered by her words, Caleb Moore, the young security guard, just a few months into the job, nervously stepped closer. His eyes met Selina's, and in that brief moment he understood something was terribly, profoundly wrong. Ma'am, Caleb began, his voice trembling slightly, but Selina lifted her hand in a quiet, decisive gesture commanding silence without a hint of aggression. Selina didn't need to say another word, because at that very instant, the massive doors of the flagship branch swung open with a resounding bang that echoed across the marble floors. Every head turned toward the entrance. Morgan Blake strode in, her navy suit cutting a sleek, commanding figure, her eyes like sharpened blades as they swept across the lobby. Behind her followed Thomas Whitmore, Isabel Grant, and Peter Langston, three board members who held the fate of Meridian Financial in their hands. Victoria Burns froze. Evan Price backed up. Noah Cross stiffened, the pen slipping from his fingers without him even noticing. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room. Morgan Blake didn't need to ask a single question. She walked directly to Selina, her normally stern face softening, a deep respect shining in her eyes. We apologize, Miss Hart, Morgan said, her voice ringing out not just for Selina to hear, but for every employee and customer stunned into silence. Victoria Burns' eyes widened, her mouth gaping open in a silent attempt to object, but no words came. She whirled toward Evan and Noah, seeking support, but found only pale, broken faces. Morgan turned, facing Victoria directly, each word falling like a hammer blow. Victoria Burns, Morgan said, do you have any idea what you've just done? Victoria stammered, desperately trying to summon a professional smile onto her bloodless face. I was simply following security protocols, she mumbled, her eyes darting around, looking for an escape. Thomas Whitmore stepped forward, his heavy hand coming down hard on Victoria's shoulder. "No," he said, his voice deep and thunderous. "You discriminated against a customer. You humiliated the CEO of this bank, and you violated the core ethical standards you swore to uphold." The heavy silence pressed down on the room. The employees behind the counter looked as if they were holding their breath. Chloe Adams clutched her hands tightly together, her eyes welling with tears. Morgan pulled a thick file from her jacket, the front stamped boldly with "Urgent." "We've reviewed the full security footage from this morning," she said, flipping the folder open, listing each violation and each act of discrimination that Victoria, Evan, and Noah had committed. "We have the evidence, we have the witnesses, and we have an undeniable truth. Under your management, this branch has become a place where fairness was trampled without mercy." Victoria attempted a weak protest, but Morgan raised her hand to cut her off. "Enough," she said sharply. Only now did Selina Hart step forward, her eyes no longer coldly observing, but blazing with the righteous fire of justice. "Victoria Burns, Evan Price, Noah Cross," Selina said, her voice resonating across the lobby, each word slicing through the heavy atmosphere like a blade. "You are terminated, effective immediately." No one dared to speak. No one dared to protest. Even the watching customers remained frozen, as if bearing witness to a sacred expulsion ceremony. Caleb Moore, the young security guard, stepped forward, his face, for the first time, showing unwavering determination. "This way, please," Caleb said, his voice steady as he motioned for Victoria, Evan, and Noah to gather their belongings. The three, who just minutes ago had strutted with arrogance, now lowered their heads and silently packed their personal items into the flimsy cardboard boxes Morgan had ordered prepared. Selina stood motionless, her gaze cold as steel, watching their every step, not out of satisfaction, but because she knew this was only the beginning. As the heavy door slammed shut behind the bowed figures of Victoria Burns, Evan Price, and Noah Cross, an unusual stillness settled over the vast lobby of Meridian Financial's flagship branch. But this time, the silence no longer carried the weight of prejudice and disdain. It was the suffocating silence of those who were now confronting an undeniable truth. An old era had just been severed, right before their eyes. Selina Hart turned, her sharp gaze sweeping across the remaining employees behind the counters. Some, like Chloe Adams, bowed their heads low, trying to suppress the tears of shame, while others stood frozen, clinging to the faint hope that they would not share the same fate as those just expelled. Selina walked slowly toward the center of the lobby, each step echoing like a hammer strike against the outdated foundation of the branch. Behind her, Morgan Blake and the three board members followed quietly, forming a solid wall of support. Selina stopped in the middle of the lobby, facing all the employees. "Gather around," she said, her voice not loud, but slicing through every layer of defense inside those standing before her. No one dared to resist. One by one, the tellers, loan officers, customer service staff, all gathered into a loose circle around Selina, their faces tense as if awaiting judgment. Selina crossed her arms, her eyes scanning each face. No anger, no hatred. Only the cold, measured assessment of a leader who knew that to truly change a system, sometimes you had to cleanse it from its roots. "What just happened," she began, her voice warm yet unyielding, "is not only the fault of three individuals." No one moved. No one even dared to breathe heavily. "It is the fault of a culture, one that has seeped into every glance, every smile, every action you considered normal. A culture that looks down on customers because of their skin color, their status, or the way they dress. And that ends today." Selina paused, letting her words seep into the tense, trembling bodies before her. "I will not fire all of you," she continued, her gaze lingering a moment longer on Chloe Adams, who was quietly crying. "But each of you will have to make a choice. Either change from the very core, or walk away from this place." Morgan Blake stepped forward, raising a tablet that displayed a full list of employees alongside detailed observations gathered from the internal security footage earlier that morning. "We recorded everything," Morgan said. "Every action, every look of disdain, every sarcastic comment. A choked sob escaped from a young employee standing near Chloe, someone who had spent the morning laughing while customers of color were being mistreated. Selena did not turn her head. Her gaze remained firm, her voice resonating like a bell through a winter night. "I do not expect perfection overnight," she said. "I expect real change. And I will give that chance to those who have the courage to recognize their mistakes, to correct them, and to commit to being better." A slight ripple moved through the crowd. Some shoulders loosened, some heads lifted for the first time since the purge began. Selena stepped closer to Chloe Adams. "Chloe," she called gently, making the young woman flinch as if pricked by a needle. Chloe looked up, her eyes red and swollen, but faintly glowing with a fragile spark of hope. "I saw the hesitation in your eyes this morning," Selena said, her voice softening. "I saw you wanting to do the right thing but lacking the courage to stand against your colleagues. I was once in that position too." Chloe nodded shakily, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Selena smiled. Not a smile of triumph, but the smile of a mentor finding a new seed of hope. "Therefore, I am giving you an opportunity," Selena said. "Chloe Adams, starting today, you will serve as the acting branch manager until we find a permanent replacement." A light gasp rippled through the circle. Chloe's mouth fell open, disbelief flashing across her face. "You won't be alone," Selena added. "There will be training, support, and new standards you must uphold. But more importantly, you will be the symbol of the change this place desperately needs." Chloe nodded vigorously, as if drawing strength from the very place where fear had once paralyzed her. Selena turned back to address the entire group. "As for the others," she said, "we will reevaluate your performance and attitude over the next 30 days. There will be mandatory training programs, real-world assessments, and those who fail to meet the new standards will have to leave." She paused, her gaze cutting through the circle like a blade once more. "Meridian Financial will no longer be a bank that serves only the chosen few. We will serve every customer with the respect, fairness, and gratitude they deserve." Outside, the last rays of morning sunlight streamed through the glass dome, illuminating Selena Hart like a silent blessing from the very justice she was building. And in that moment, within the heart of every soul present, from the longest tenured employee to the quiet customers watching in awe, everyone understood. An old era had died, and a new era, one of integrity, had just begun. 3 days later, the Grand Elysian Hotel, a magnificent building in the heart of the city, became the center of attention for the entire financial media world. Outside the grand lobby, banners bearing the Meridian Financial logo stood tall, while camera flashes exploded as journalists, reporters, and civil rights organization representatives poured in. Inside the main conference hall, rows of leather chairs were perfectly aligned, all facing a simple, yet dignified stage. Above the podium, the Meridian logo was placed next to a freshly designed slogan, rushed to completion within 48 hours. Equity, integrity, future. And at the center of it all stood Selena Hart. No longer in the simple hoodie from that day. Now she wore a sharp, navy blue suit, her delicate face touched lightly with makeup, her eyes burning brightly like twin beacons leading the way. The room fell silent the moment Selena stepped onto the stage. No need for a gavel, no need for anyone to call for order. Her very presence alone made all noise vanish. Selena adjusted the microphone with a decisive movement. She looked directly out at the sea of faces before her, hundreds of camera lenses, hundreds of expectant eyes. She began. 3 days ago, Selena said, her voice echoing across the hall. At one of our most important branches, a customer was denied service, was suspected, and was humiliated. Not because of financial reasons, not because of security concerns, but simply because of how they looked. Selena paused, letting her words soak into the thick, expectant air. That customer, she continued, her eyes blazing, was me. A ripple of shock swept through the room, rising, then quickly falling into stunned silence. Reporters looked at each other, wide-eyed and astonished. Some dropped their pens. Selena remained calm. I witnessed firsthand a system where unconscious bias had become routine. I experienced what so many of our customers, people of color, immigrants, workers, endure every single day, she said, each word striking the industry's veneer of respectability like a hammer shattering glass. "And today," Selina said, her voice growing stronger, "I'm not just here to recount that story. I am here to change it." Behind her, a massive screen lit up, displaying the words, "The Equitable Banking Initiative, Committed Investment, $50 million." Selina turned back to face the entire hall. Meridian Financial will invest $50 million into a comprehensive initiative to eliminate all forms of discrimination within our banking operations, she declared. This initiative will include mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, the formation of a minority community customer advisory board, and the revision of performance evaluations where equitable service will become a required metric alongside profitability. Some reporters began frantically taking notes. Others raised their cameras, capturing image after image of Selina, her face now projected boldly onto the giant LED screen behind her, standing as a symbol of a new era. "Starting today," Selina continued, "every Meridian branch will post a pledge at the teller counters. Every customer deserves to be served with respect, fairness, and dignity. If you feel you have not received that, please call me directly." The screen behind her changed again, this time displaying a large phone number under the caption, "Direct contact with the CEO, Selina Hart." Another wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. A national CEO publishing a direct contact number, something unheard of in the history of finance, sent shockwaves through the industry. Selina paused, scanning the room once more. "We can no longer pretend these injustices don't exist," she said. "But we can decide that we will no longer tolerate them, not for one more day." A collective breath seemed to rise from the audience. A young reporter, representing a major news network, stood up abruptly. "Do you believe these initiatives will actually change the banking industry?" he asked, his voice a mix of skepticism and hope. Selina smiled, the smile of someone who had weathered storms and stood unbroken. "No one changes an entire system with words alone," she replied. "We change it through action, one branch, one employee, one customer, one day at a time." The entire hall erupted into a thunderous standing ovation, reverberating off the elegant wood-paneled walls. Behind her, the board members, Thomas Whitmore, Isabel Grant, Peter Langston, rose to their feet, joined by Morgan Blake and the newly reformed leadership team of Meridian Financial. That day, it wasn't just a bank that was reborn. It was an entire industry, once thought to be untouchable, that felt the first tremors of transformation. And standing firm at the epicenter of that seismic shift was Selina Hart, the woman who had turned humiliation into strength, silence into action, and a moment of injustice into a force that would rewrite history. 6 months after that historic day, Selina Hart once again donned her familiar hoodie, tied her natural hair back neatly, slipped on simple sneakers, and stepped out, unannounced, without an entourage. No CEO nameplate. No priority access pass. Just her, an ordinary customer, walking the bustling city streets, the crowded residential neighborhoods, the small towns where once upon a time, if you weren't part of the white middle-class community, you would feel out of place from the very first glance of a bank employee. Selina stopped by a Meridian Financial branch in the northern suburbs, a location once infamous for having the highest service complaint rate in the city. The automatic doors slid open before her, carrying the chill of air conditioning and the scent of paperwork. But this time, the first thing that struck Selina was not the familiar cold stare. A young white teller smiled warmly, standing up as soon as she saw Selina walk in. "Welcome to Meridian Financial. How can I assist you today?" The voice was gentle, the eyes sincere, not a hint of suspicion. Selina nodded slightly, pretending to rummage through her handbag. She made a request to withdraw a larger than usual amount of cash, just like she had that day at the flagship branch, a simple but highly revealing test. The teller, a young woman named Megan, accepted the documents from Selina's hand, glanced over them, confirmed the account, and smiled again. "Of course, Miss Hart," Megan said without the slightest hesitation. "Please allow me a few minutes to complete the transaction for you. No extra ID checks. No scrutinizing glances. No whispered comments behind her back." Selina sat down in the waiting area, her eyes sweeping across the lobby. On the wall opposite the teller counters, a newly installed plaque hung proudly, Every customer deserves to be served with respect, dignity, and fairness. If you feel your experience does not reflect these values, please call 1-800 Selena. Beneath those words was the direct phone number to the CEO's office, Selena Hart's personal line. Megan returned after just a few minutes, carefully counting the cash in front of Selena according to proper procedure, then handing over both the money and paperwork with both hands. "Thank you for trusting Meridian Financial," she said, her smile unwavering. Selena tucked the money away, nodded politely to Megan, and made her way toward the exit. As she stepped through the glass doors, she paused and turned back for a moment. Not out of suspicion, but because she could feel it. Something had truly changed. No more cold stares, no more unspoken interrogations, no more suffocating invisible barriers. At every branch she visited, Selena meticulously recorded notes in the small leather notebook she always carried. Not to punish anyone, but to recognize the bright spots. The individuals who were truly striving to kindle the flame of fairness she had worked so hard to ignite. Finally, Selena returned to the flagship branch, the very battleground of her struggle. The familiar glass doors opened once more. But this time, standing to greet her was Chloe Adams, dressed smartly in a navy blue suit, a new nameplate gleaming proudly. Chloe Adams, branch manager. Chloe's face lit up like a flower, blooming after a long, hard rain when she saw Selena. "Welcome back, Miss Hart," Chloe said, her voice filled with pride and deep gratitude. Selena stepped forward, smiling, and shook Chloe's hand firmly. "Very good," Selena said softly, a quiet word of encouragement. No need for grand declarations. Chloe didn't know it, but in that moment, Selena silently acknowledged something. What she had sparked was no longer confined to speeches, statistics, or plaques on the wall. It had taken root in people's hearts. It had grown into actions. It had become part of the very lifeblood of Meridian Financial. Stepping outside the branch, Selena Hart paused under the vast, brilliant blue sky, the golden sunlight pouring down over her jet-black hair. In her hand, the old leather notebook was now filled, cover to cover, with notes, small stories of kindness, and glimpses of real change. She gently brushed her hand over the worn cover and closed her eyes for a moment. Now, she was not just changing a bank. She was redefining what justice truly meant. And that journey, no matter how long, no matter how difficult, would always begin with the simplest things. One person, one action, one unbreakable belief.